how do you understand our relationship with Hashem vis-a-vis who we are and the way we are created? Who are we praying to? Who are we talking to? Is there a part of God within us? Is God out there? We're here. How do we bridge that gap? No, light question.
To unpack your rather very dense question, so let's just start with something which we're more comfortable with. Everybody here is familiar with the most classic sentence in the Torah: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one." What does that mean? So Maimonides discusses that. What is God's oneness? And he talks about that in his Mishnah Torah in the first chapter of the Foundations of the Torah. And he says, God's oneness is absolutely unique. He's not one like a body. So if we have a person before us, it's one person. But yet scientists tell us that that one person is composed of 37 trillion cells. So he's one, but yet many, composed of parts. So number one, God is a oneness who's not a body, and therefore he has no parts. And two, he's not a oneness like an idea. Let's say that we have an idea called beauty. Well, you're beautiful, and everybody here is beautiful. So everybody partakes of the concept, the singular concept of beauty. So that's a plurality. So God's oneness applies to only one thing: himself. So therefore, God is he's absolutely he's perfect. He's absolutely one, and he can't be part of his created world, because if he did, he would have parts, and that would contradict the most foundational sentence that we say many times every day: Hashem Echad, God is one. He's uniquely one, a oneness that is exclusive to him. And not only that, there's the greatest Kabbalist, Nachmanides, who lived in the generation after Maimonides, who wrote the first Kabbalistic commentary on the Torah. And he said, he took it one step further than the Maimonides. He said, imagining God having parts is a contradiction. And you cannot believe a contradiction. You cannot believe in a square circle. You cannot. So you can say it. You could say that God has parts, or there's a part of God in all of us, but you don't really believe it, because you cannot believe in a contradiction. So both the Kabbalist, the original Kabbalist, one of the most primary, and Maimonides, the great rationalist, are agreed that the oneness of God precludes him being in his created. Him and his creation are separate. That's why it's a creation. There was, as it were, God existed separate from there was no creation. And then, due to his will, emerged from him the created world. Why? We do not know. It's another thing. This is an area where you have to have humility. We also do not know a lot. But we have some foundational principles that is part of our tradition. And just understanding what Moshe said. God is one. He's uniquely one. No parts, no body, and not part of his, and completely other than his created world. Has no correlation, does not look. What makes people very confused is the term Tselem Elokim, God's image. That is a metaphorical concept. We have a similarity to God, as Rashi, the great medieval commentator, says, that God, the image of God means reason and speech. Mankind was given a profound, generous gift, the ability to think, to reason, and to communicate ideas. The greatest gift. In that way, we are similar in a metaphorical way to God. But we don't look like God. You may even call it a godliness because it's so unique. But us and God are completely different. And the Rambam even goes further. He says, if the entire material world, the universe, would not exist, God would exist in his perfection. And if we don't add anything to him and we don't subtract anything to him, his perfection is eternal.
All right, excellent. So maybe we can just pick up on this one point, Daniel, that Rabbi Penny shared, which is that, and tell me if I'm saying this right, Penny, that because God's unity is absolute, we can't partake of God's existence in any way. God's there and we're here because we are the creation. He is the creator. And by definition, if we would somehow partake of God's existence, that would somehow compromise his oneness or his unity.
Right. And that would not be God.
So I don't have enough time to go into the entire Hasidic and Kabbalistic answer to that, or different perspective to what Rav Pini said. I think there's a story in the Talmud and one of the ancient writings that says that there was someone who asked a similar question. If you see so much, how could you say God is everywhere when we see so much multiplicity and detail? And he pointed to the different windows and the different sun rays, the lights coming through the different windows, and you saw light everywhere. If you look at a lake or a river and you see sun gleaming, thousands, millions of dots on the lake, and you say, wow, there's so many different aspects of light. So, no, it's really just one source. It's one sun. If you go through a prism, light goes through a prism and different colors come out. It's all coming from one source. So the idea of God being detached or not part of this world or this universe is, I'm sure we'll get more into it as the night goes on. The mystical approach is quite the opposite, that yes, it is not at all a infringement on God's essence and infinity, but to limit God to infinity, so to speak, to limit God to not being able to manifest his light in a limited form or in details is also a limitation on God, is a detraction from God. Just briefly on what you said at the beginning about, is God found within or without? I think about Avraham Avinu and the patriarchs and the prophets. Avraham was known to investigate the world and see God in it, logically. But he was also considered one of the greatest mystics, like Sefer Yetzirah is attributed, the first book of Kabbalah is attributed to him. And I think they go hand in hand in that the Jewish people at Mount Sinai experienced a revelation from God, a mystical experience. So our entire religion, our entire belief system is not just a intellectual investigation, but is also something mystical that's experienced. And we could go a lot into, Rav Pini brought up a lot of interesting points, and definitely truth in the Rambam's approach, but there's definitely some differences I'm sure we'll get into.